Here we go. Wonderful to see everyone. Thank you for your patience. Welcome to the second episode of Leadership for Breakfast. This is super exciting for me for many reasons. One of the main reasons is I get to talk with and continue to learn from a mentor of mine for many, many years. Scary enough, I think we're approaching our 8-year relationship anniversary, Rob, which is pretty impressive. And Rob, we want to make sure your audio is good to go. So say something magnificent for everyone to hear right now.
And this is my present.
There we go. That's right. Okay, wonderful. We can hear you.
It's a pleasure to be here, Joe. How can you hear me?
Great. I can hear you well. I think there might be a small delay. And if there is any type of technology delay from us hearing you, we may just go off video, and I'll let you know if there's a delay or not. But I'd like to welcome everyone to the call. Thank you, and I love seeing everyone's faces again. Several of our founders are on the call. Several of our investors are on the call. So it's great to see everyone, and we appreciate everyone making time for a Friday conversation about what I believe and what our fund believes at Room to be one of the most important things that we possibly could discuss, which is teams, leadership, and culture. And we have the opportunity and the privilege today to learn from someone who's walking around with a lot of wisdom and experience. And I always enjoy and get tons of energy having a conversation around this topic with Rob Newson, United States Navy Captain, SEAL, retired, and now on to doing amazing things. So Rob, thanks for taking time to connect with us today.
My pleasure, Joe.
So I want to start with, lots of folks in the audience, I do know this, always have a question like, how does one make the decision to say, I would like to be a Navy SEAL? So maybe you can walk us through the days when you were a super slacker swimmer in college and then decided to go off and become a Navy SEAL. Audience, give me some feedback. Can you hear Rob? Thumbs up, thumbs down? No? Hey, Rob, so maybe we go off camera. Maybe we go off camera because we can't hear you. How are we doing now?
I'm back,
Rob?
Joe. Yeah, I'm
You're back. Okay, great. So back to our conversation. What drove you to go from college to becoming a United States Navy SEAL?
I was going through a Navy ROTC program and your year orientation. You visit jets, inclusive jets, and submarines and ships, and I thought this is going to be a long 4 years in the Navy. And the very last day is the day they took you half a day with the SEALs, so you watch a cheese.
Oh no.
Joe,
well, we lost you a bit.
You have me?
Yep. We lost you a bit. Now we have you back.
In Vermont, and the net is extremely weak here. How do you have me now?
A little better. A little better.
Can you hear me, Joe?
I can. A little better.
Yeah. So I was saying that did orientation and didn't think I was going to enjoy the Navy at all until I found the SEAL teams, and we spent a day doing course watching a cheesy movie about the frogmen, and I found my tribe and was just so grateful to be accepted into the training program and then graduate buds, and it started off a great 30-year adventure.
So a 30-year adventure. that's pretty remarkable, but you had an unusual, by definition, experience even within the SEAL teams. What I mean by that is Rob had the privilege to be tapped to launch some startup activity inside of the SEAL community. Now, this is highly unusual, but I think Rob was at the right time, right place, and he's obviously the right man to begin experimenting and innovating on behalf of the SEAL teams. And maybe give us a brief background into some of the deployments and maybe geographically where you were with what you can share, and then move into when you were tapped to kind of launch one of the very first startups inside of Navy SEAL, this Navy SEAL community, in addition to the Naval Special Warfare community.
Yeah, so I before the war on terrorism, I made deployments to the Philippines and to Guam, and then those were standard kind of non-combat training deployments prior to 9/11. After 9/11, I went to Bosnia. We were hunting persons indicted for war crimes, and then to Kenya, working inside the U.S. Embassy in Nairobi, getting after Al-Shabaab. And then I did tours with General McChrystal, running his joint source operations cell. It was a kind of coordinating the spy networks inside of Iraq. I deployed with Admiral McCraven, running his joint interagency task force for counterterrorism, which was responsible for all of the terrorist networks outside of the combat zones. So really, we were about leveraging all the power of the government to get after terrorist networks when direct action missions weren't an option. And then I spent 2 years in Yemen as the task force commander, training our Yemeni partners to get after Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula. But right after 9/11, there was quite a bit of startup activity, and I was part of the SOCOM Special Operations Center, which was a startup in itself that was responsible for coordinating the war on terrorism. And there we started talking about how the units needed to change. And I was grateful to have the opportunity to set up the Special Activities Command, Support Activity 1, which now is Special Reconnaissance Team 1. And their job was to take all the intelligence capability of the United States Navy, turn it into a package that became the targeting engine for SEAL teams, and deploy that with the SEAL teams that were deploying. And this was unique in it was the first time that we took intelligence specialists and put them under the command of Navy SEALs at every level. So at the lieutenant level, at the lieutenant commander level, and of course I was running the whole thing as an 05. Our success rate in Iraq, what we call jackpot for capture or kill the terrorist target, was about 35% before we started the targeting engine effort, and 4 years later it was 95%. So it was really a groundbreaking effort. 15 years later, we kind of celebrated on LinkedIn the anniversary of standing it up, and I was pleased and shocked to see every single member was counted that as their best tour in the Navy. As many of your founders know, there's nothing like starting something new and scoring big success with it.
Yeah, again, remarkable experience. And you know, Rob was someone that I looked to personally and professionally. Knowing this background, he was highly recommended to me to be a mentor and a coach and an advisor when we were starting up something called the Honor Foundation. And I would consider Rob very much one of the not only early adopters, but co-founders of that organization and helping to guide me. Alongside that startup experience, and you must have mentored and coached and advised leaders of leaders. And when I think of your experience, I always am curious to have people answer this question. There had to be someone young and inspiring as you were leading and coaching these men and women throughout the special operations community that caught your eye and knew that they were going to be special and were just impressive to you. What are some of the early lessons of leadership that, despite you perhaps being higher in the chain of command, you're looking down at these folks that are coming up on your coattails and thinking, wow, this person's exceptional. Give us some of those examples of those folks that you had to lead. And the reason why I asked the question, founders are constantly hiring people, hopefully, that are better than they are at certain things. And how do you nurture those types of relationships is always a question that I get asked on our calls. So maybe talk about that and some of the examples that you had throughout your career.
Yeah. What was interesting, it was beg, borrow, and steal. We took money from a lot of the SEAL teams. We took some of their manpower and some of their responsibilities. And so it was,
Hey, Rob, we're losing you again. I'm wondering if maybe you can go off video just for the time being.
some of it I later drove some. Happy to.
Thank you,
So how
sir.
can you hear me now, Joe?
A little better,
Yeah.
thank you.
Sorry about the very weak connection. Not much to do in Bozeman, Vermont. But they sent us some guys that they didn't think were very good, and I think it was a matter of fit and opportunity. And we really had some amazing people that were able to shine. And what I was really impressed with was these were SEALs who weren't raised in the intelligence community and became intelligence experts who knew the craft and the trade of signals intelligence and human intelligence and sensor intelligence, and were able to integrate it. So, when I look for talent, it was people who could, one, become not experts, but experts at integration and know enough of the details to be a workman, and then that were very good at integration and translating technical speak to leaders who understood how to implement the thing. So those were some of the young talent that I found were just amazing men and women who were great at integration and great at people skills.
Integration and people skills. How important is and I'm sure you've had to evolve this throughout your career, how important is EQ in those types of new environments where you have to onboard folks that don't have the quote unquote technical background to actually do the job that you're bringing them to do? I've always found this fascinating with the special operations community, where if you were to show people the technical skill sets to go become a diplomat or follow around an ambassador or go be a statesman on behalf of the SEAL teams and work on diplomacy with ambassadors, no one actually has the technical skill set to do that, but they do rely on their natural ability and their EQ. So I'm wondering if you could talk about the importance of EQ in leadership.
I think it's absolutely foundational, and it gets to the question of, you can have in my life great SEALs who were phenomenal operators but had minimal emotional intelligence and would fail on the battlefield and fail in strategic levels because they were bulls in the china shop. And so having emotional intelligence to read a room, to engage, to understand the motivations of others. And Joe, I know you've heard me talk a lot about outward mindset and seeing people as people, and they have their own wants, needs, desires, and goals. And really that's what emotional intelligence is about, is understanding what people want and need and aligning your goals to their goals. And if you can't do that, then at some point there's going to be a big separation of perspectives, and usually the guys in the military are going to lose that conversation with an ambassador if they're not aligned with his thinking or can come around and shape what we're trying to do in the broader picture of the country team. So that emotional intelligence was incredibly important as we were developing our human intelligence capability of, developing the spy network of folks in Iraq and Afghanistan. Again, it's about understanding people and caring about them in at least a level that you can relate to them.
I mean, that has to be, I mean, imagine, this is whenever I hear founders talk about like opening up a new city, or we're trying to expand, customer accounts and dropping into a new place to figure out the environment. I always think of the special operations community dropping in the middle of nowhere with no connections and immediately having to build rapport and, building and tightening sinew between the SEAL teams and the local leaders. And this is what I always found fascinating learning from you all. It's not always rank that is the person making decisions. And I think this lesson is very translatable to the startup community. And so maybe talk about going into a new place and how you would landscape or map the landscape of leadership inside of a very remote place, because it's not always the person that people are reporting to. It's the 6 elders in the cave off in the mountain that are the ones really running things. And maybe talk about what you've learned from that experience around power dynamics and in new areas and building rapport.
Just talking to, I worked for 3 seasons with the 76ers and the general manager, Elton Brand. And my last talk with him as I was leaving the organization was about organizational cartography, mapping, the network and not just from a hierarchy perspective, but affinity and group perspective, who talks to who and who gets along and who doesn't and who needs more attention or not. And that's really what you're talking about. If you're going into a foreign country, I'm plopped down with a new task force in Yemen, or I'm trying to coordinate human networks and source operations cells across Iraq. Nobody trusts the new guy, and you're talking about people's lives when you're talking about these things. And so it's an ability, one, to understand who's who and map that out. And I actually, drew bubble charts and lines and tried to understand who were key influencers of the people that I needed to influence, because sometimes it wasn't the direct route, but the indirect route that mattered. And the other thing that I found dependent, we had some amazing, gregarious guys who, came into a room and owned it. And within a week or two, they were mayor of wherever they were. And then there was guys who were extremely quiet and slow to engage, but they built their network and they built their influence in a different way. And so I'm one of those more quiet guys who, went to Yemen and just kind of was there with our Yemeni partners constantly, without a lot of engagement, with a lot of, chit chat, but just sharing their space. And that made a difference and was huge as time went on.
There's back to the EQ leadership and having, diplomatic skill sets and statesmanship. You were a U.S. what they call a U.S. Navy fellow at CFR, which is the Council on Foreign Relations, and you wrote a couple different articles on future conflict implications. And it's funny, the more I read the things that you write, you have a very unique talent in making extremely complex things understandable for people without a background, in said experience. So tell us about that experience of being CFR and what you were working on in New York City.
It's so funny. It's a lesson, I think, in hustle, right? And exceeding expectations in typical SEAL. For the headquarters, the announcement or the requirement to nominate someone for CFR was misdirected. It went to our previous commander in Tampa and then back to the headquarters in Coronado. And so when they opened it up, they had one day to figure out who they were going to nominate for the Council on Foreign Relations, which is the Navy's most prestigious senior fellowship. And I just have to be
Hey, Rob, you're breaking up again, and it was very anticlimactic the way that you broke up. We didn't
thought
get a
it
chance.
was a throwaway
Hey, Rob,
nomination, but I reached out even because I had worked for him. How can you hear me now, Joe?
I can hear you okay, but it was very anticlimactic. You were telling us you happened to be walking down the hall, and then you broke up, and we didn't get to hear. We didn't get to hear
Yeah.
how you came about it.
So I'm walking down the hall, and the guy that is responsible for forwarding the nomination to our senior leader said, "Hey, Rob, you want to go to CFR?" And I'm like, "Yeah." And so I'm nominated, right? But they thought it was a throwaway. Hey, we have to send the chief of naval operations a name. We're going to send him Rob, but there's no way he's going to get this. It's the most prestigious fellowship the Navy has to offer. But from that point, I started hustling, and Admiral Craven was gracious enough to give me a nomination letter, a recommendation letter. General Cleveland, who I'd worked for in Yemen, gave it to me, and our fantastic N1, which is equivalent to an HR leader, said, "Hey, you need a Navy nomination." And so she hooked me up with the commander of 7th Fleet, who I'd briefly known, and he was going to write me a letter. And days went on, he didn't write the letter. And I reached out to him. I said, "Hey, so I really need that letter." And he said, "No, don't worry about it. I just nominated you as 7th Fleet nomination too." So, with 2 major command nominations and some great recommendations, I received the interviews and was selected to go to CFR. And really, it was just about hustle against the odds. I wasn't a prime candidate. The Navy had guys who were, primed for flag officer and had done amazing things. So I felt very fortunate to go. But it's just, keeping on grinding and putting the best forward. And then I go to CFR for a year. We actually lived in New York, and what an amazing experience to be around the level and caliber of experts and people. And so we were involved in everything. Lori Garrett is one of the world's best in public health, and she was advising the General Milley, who was the chief of staff of the Army at the time, on Zika and how to prep a task force that was going to Africa to combat Zika. And so we got involved in that. We were obviously involved in discussing the crisis, the different crises of the day. And it, for many of us, it was the first time that we stepped out of kind of the quiet warrior diplomat perspective and write articles that were going out in Time Magazine and Newsweek and Opinion. What an experience to kind of find your voice.
And when you think about finding your own voice, if you were to look at, this is a question that I give your teammates, now having seen nearly 2,000 of them transition into the next great adventure of their lives. If I were to hand Rob Newson your current resume when you were coming into the SEAL teams and say, "I need you to do all this," you would have looked at that resume and been like, "I can't do any of this." And I always compare that to founders where they're driven by this idea that's probably completely unreasonable, highly unlikely, very challenging, and they don't have the resume necessarily to possibly pull it off when they begin. And starting something from nothing is one of the hardest things anyone can do in their life. And I would love to know how you continued to build on your skill set to actually accomplish the resume that you have, because you were approached for all types of projects and ideas inside the SEAL teams that you, Rob, did not necessarily have the skill set for. But I do believe that people can earn skill sets with a lot of hard work and due diligence inward into themselves. So what type of self-work did you do throughout your career to convince yourself repeatedly that you could do the tasks that you were given?
Well, I think an amazing skill, which I was fortunate to have, was just a blissful ignorance. And whether you're a new parent raising kids or starting starting a new command that grew to one of the largest in naval special warfare and the SEAL teams. It's not worrying about the things that you don't know, or having excessive worry. My better half Kimberly always jokes about I'm more of a kind of a hayseed that just walks around fat, dumb, and happy, because I don't take counsel of fears or inadequacies, and we're all aware of our shortcomings, but really it's about the mindset, and it's about a focus of what do I need to do and how am I going to do it and who's going to help me do it. And Joe, I've seen you do this as well. You can sell ice cream to an Eskimo and get them to pay the best price for it. And it's because you believe in what you're doing. And that's the best leaders I've seen, a level of ignoring fears and inadequacies or shortfalls, or not taking inventory of, man, look at all the things that I don't know. And that's what was so great about being so young, raising children, is you don't know a lot, but you're just going to get through it. And with that attitude and hard work, you can really do a lot of things that people who looked at your resume or knew your background, I never saw that coming.
Yeah, so you bring up two things. I'd like to talk about failure, and I'd like to talk about, and I'll segue into becoming a father. There's a lot of people on the call with children, and they're all doing very, very hard things in life, and they're challenging themselves. But first, on failure, when you have failed, because we've talked about this before, two things: how did you deal with that failure, and then how did your leadership coach you through that failure, both good and bad examples?
So, when starting at Buds, I rolled back once, and so I failed in evolution, and they kept me around, but I had to restart with a new class, and I spent a day feeling sorry for myself, and then put up motivational pictures and posters in my room, and my roommate was like, "Okay, Rob's back," and then throughout my career, I've had some very large disappointments and some failures that could have been catastrophic if the story ends at that point. But the key is that I knew my story didn't end with that, with that shortcoming, with that failure, but it was about what is next. And so I think that's a key aspect of falling, is getting up and saying, okay, what's next, and how do I get out of this spot? And so that was key. It's funny. I worked for some great leaders. When I've had those failures, I didn't a lot of counsel. May be familiar with this, is it's pretty lonely when going right, are willing to sit down and cancel, or you're going to get through this, and this is what leadership positions. It was kind of dealing with crickets. Eventually I had a couple of great leaders who reached out afterwards and were like, man, I wasn't sure you were going to pull that through, but I have newfound respect for you for coming out of that one. So I think it's, when you're thinking about failure, be prepared to be lonely in it, as well as potentially reaching out to friends and mentors who can give you some guidance. But it's always about what's next after something goes wrong. It's not, oh man, what's happening now, or how did I get into this? There's time for after action and lessons learned, but there's also, you gotta look forward, and you gotta drive to the next thing.
How has being a dad made you a better leader?
It's funny. My children are turning 31, 32, 31, and 34. And I was a single parent. I was married for 7 years. I was in the SEAL teams. I was on deployment, and my wife called me up and said, I don't think I want to be married anymore. That was a shot out of the blue. I came back, we separated, and I eventually, within a matter of months, became a single parent, raising 3 kids that were 6, 5, and 4. And just recently, my son said, "Hey, Dad, you've talked a little bit about, how we helped you be a better man. Can you tell me about that?" And I said, when you're a young, handsome frogman and the world is your oyster, it's easy to be consumed by yourself. And when you have 3 little Groms that are 6, 4, and 3, there is no way that you can be consumed with yourself. And so they made me a better man because I I was thinking about them and thinking about others. And that's, that I think that has affected my leadership as well, where you want the success of your people as much as you want it for yourself. And so you care more, I think, as a parent, or at least you've been given insight into what it means to have enormous responsibility for somebody's life, and then you apply that as a leader. And right, people's jobs and livelihoods are incredibly important, and it affects their lives. And so I think that's how being a parent has affected my leadership. Is I think about the impact of my decisions, and I want and really try to help people succeed.
So you posted something on LinkedIn earlier this year, and it was about your decision not to tell people that you had cancer.
Yeah.
And you went through, in great detail, for the reasons why, and how much people care and how people get angry. And I'm reading this post, and I got through half of it, and I started calling you because I was so angry at you that you didn't tell me that you had cancer this whole time. And I'm so glad you didn't pick up, because I fell right into the trap that you posted about, that people take on, these stressors when people around them that they care about and love are going through something painful. And I'm glad that you missed those calls, because I was such a fool and I felt so badly, but I care about you so much. And I had spoken to you so many times, and never knew. You literally didn't tell anyone that you were battling cancer for years. And now that you're hopefully on the tail end of all of that and in remission, I would love to know about that decision, and keeping so discreet about it because you care so much about others. It was a real example for me in life that happened in real time, where I fell right into that trap of getting so upset and angry and stressed and thinking about your pain, and how much I care for you, and the reasons why you didn't tell folks. So maybe walk us through that journey, and whatever you feel comfortable sharing, and how your leadership played into that decision, in addition to battling and fighting and beating cancer.
Yeah, of course. So in 2017, I was diagnosed with a very aggressive cancer, immediate surgery within a couple months, radiation, chemotherapy, hormone therapy, and that really rocks your life. With it survival, but my wife and I had this conversation, and she's an ER doctor and physician, and also a Navy veteran. And so she knows the Navy, she knows organizations. And she said, "Look, everybody is going to look at you differently once you tell them you have cancer." Right. And it comes from a place of part of our as as less than, right, as struggling. I just got certified in Arbinger Outward Inclusion seminar and workshop, so I can facilitate it. Inclusion is something I care very much about. And I was struck, it really struck a chord when a woman talked about a disability she had, and she didn't want that to be her defining aspect of her character that everyone saw. And if I think of Jan, I'm going to think of disability. And that was really a large part of it. Is I didn't look, I'm struggling to stay alive. I don't want to look in the eyes of the people I care about and just see more pain and more worry, and be responsible for their feelings as well. And so I didn't, I told my boss at work, and he allowed me to have all the time off I needed. But most of the people at work knew something was going on. But I preferred them not knowing and treating me like the same old Rob that I was, than treating me with kit gloves and being overwhelmingly concerned. And so every time I saw him, it was, how you doing? And I got to talk about how am I doing, or not talking about how am I doing, and play it down. And so to me, the big lesson learned was, hey, people are going through stuff, and it's serious stuff, and you can support them without laying your own feelings and concern and pressures on them. And so that my struggles through that kind of opened my eyes on how I treat other people with disabilities or limitations. And as a SEAL, you never show your weakness. You hide your vulnerabilities, and you're not going to show any cracks. And that's been our detriment, right? When guys suffer with depression or PTSD or TBI and end up killing themselves, or going into a spiral of dependence on alcohol or drugs, it's part of it is because they haven't reached out. But it's, my perspective is you can't force your own feelings and concern on somebody else. They have to bring it, and there's other ways to support. But so I've talked a lot of ongoing about this. So that's, I guess that's perspective. The last thing I'll say, Joe, is I think right, cancer in the military is a very grave concern. It's one of my passion projects. But across the spectrum, and especially in special operations, we've been exposed to all kinds of and I think contribute to enormous rates of cancer in the military. So that's the other thing that I took away from battle is, hey, there's a lot of teammates out there who are fighting and dying because they're ignoring symptoms, they're getting diagnosed late, and when they are diagnosed, it's a stage 4 terminal diagnosis instead of catching it early. So that's why I've spoken out so much lately, is right, it's not about me, it's about everybody else now, and know your risk and get on top of it.
So thank you for sharing that. And even I, despite having transitioned so many of your teammates, I was entirely unaware of the data and statistics surrounding cancer inside of the military. So thank you again for opening my eyes to something that I did not see. This last question before we open it up to questions from the audience, I can't get off the call without, at least mentioning my favorite story that I always talk about with Rob Newson, where early in my career of starting an institute, from nothing, like a full blown, think of it as like Y Combinator for the operator, trying to launch themselves into the next great adventure of their life, or like an MBA, executive MBA in transition. And I was building the curriculum out from scratch. And so I had to test a lot of things. And I was really 1 for 1, 2 for 2, 3 for 3 every class. And then, this professor, that, individual looked really good on paper, West Point, all the big 4 firms. But I didn't vet him one-on-one like I did the others, because I became complacent in my own intuition on what great looked like. And every professor before that, or I should say faculty member, because they're not all professors, every faculty member before that, I would sit down with and audit them teaching. I would fly to wherever they were to see how effective they were at the audience. You can imagine 40 Navy SEALs in a classroom is a daunting audience, and you have to make sure that you find the right personalities that can build rapport quickly. When I finished that class, I knew that I was really in for it. And Rob, pulled me aside with a very straight face and said, Joe, you sucked today. And there was no laughing about it. It was like I knew what he meant, and he was very lighthearted after he said that, with very much a hand on shoulder, and said, look, just get past it and don't break your process to date, and just get better. And hopefully, I didn't suck that way moving forward. But here's something that I do tell, that I take from that lesson, and I tell entrepreneurs when we're working on our one-on-ones. You need to have someone in your life that you respect as a gold standard so much that they can tell you that you are messing up and that you suck. And you need that person as a critiquer, as a sharpener, as a whetstone. But you first have to find that gold standard. And Rob, you were certainly that gold standard for me. And you telling me I sucked that day is a lesson that I will keep with me forever. But how would you coach and or pass on coaching to entrepreneurs who maybe don't have that person in their life that they can tell things to and know that they're going to honestly tell them that they messed up, you sucked today, but you need to get better, and this is how you do it? How do you find people like that, and how important are those people in a leadership journey?
Yeah, they're absolutely critical, right? Because all leaders can be consumed with what's in their face, and their organization is going to have some missteps and failures. And I come from the Navy, where the guy in charge is ultimately accountable for everything. And it doesn't matter if he was asleep in his rack in the middle of the night and the ship runs aground, or whatever happens. Ship is him, and he is the ship. And if something goes wrong, it's his fault. So having that sense of ultimate responsibility, I think, is incredibly important. But it shouldn't be an anchor around your neck. It should be a propeller on your butt, right? To do better, to be on top of it. And Joe, when I know, when I told you suck, it was from two perspectives. One was coming from love. I appreciated you and what you were doing and how you were doing it. And the second one was I was just as captured with your vision as you were. And so, if you're looking for a mentor, find someone who's captured with your vision and can maintain it and hold it even while you're consumed with fighting the alligators out of the boat. You've got someone who is looking over the horizon and seeing where you're going and what you're building and saying, hey man, we got way off course on that one. Let's get it back together. And so I think when you're looking for a mentor, and you're going to find the best people to hold you accountable with the ones who are really bought in and committed to your vision and what you're trying to build. And, once you find them, maintain those relationships in your life. And it's easy to lose track of people, to lose contact and not stay as close. So develop that battle rhythm of reaching out to people and engaging, so that when you need something, they know where you are in your life, they know what's moving forward and what's not, and they can give you the honest, I care about you. Joe, that night I came home and I told Kimberly, I told Joe he sucked, and she was like, that's awful. And I said, no, it wasn't awful. It was the thing he needed to hear. So he's going to make things better. And the brand of the Honor Foundation was excellence in transition. Mm-hmm. And so if that's your brand, then you better nail it every time, or that's not your brand. And so that's, I think that's the lesson both of us took away from one bad class out of 2000.
Yeah, certainly. And again, always grateful for that. There's just, I have 2 minutes before we open it up to questions. So everyone, think of a question that you would like to know or have Rob answer, and I'll call on everybody in 2 minutes. But in this last 2 minutes, if you could sum up some attributes and characteristic traits that you recognized in some of the greatest leaders throughout your career, what are they and how would you describe them?
So of what? I'm sorry, you broke up there at the end.
So throughout your career, you've obviously come across, exceptional leaders. And what, in your opinion, what are some of the attributes that belong to these leaders, and how would you describe them?
It's funny. I partnered with a couple of guys, friends that we're trying to write an article on future leadership, leading now and adapting to the future at the same time. And so we're wrestling with this question of what are the attributes. And I think the absolute initial crucial one is an insatiable curiosity, a desire to know more, to know how things work, to get after a deeper understanding. And all of the amazing leaders I've worked for, McChrystal and McCraven and Mattis were dudes who really dug into understanding and studying and talking to people with different perspectives. And so curiosity, I think, is absolutely foundational. And then there's also a piece of it gets back to outward mindset, seeing people as people and caring about who they are, and right under recognition. I saw Matt right format out of hundreds of thousands of people, and he was worried you wouldn't remember me. He said, "That's funny, Rob. I thought the same thing." So there's an enormous amount of humility and caring that goes into, I think, transformational leadership as well. So I'll leave it there with those two: absolute unbridled curiosity and so.
Yeah, and with your experience, Rob, you're breaking up a bit towards the end, so maybe move around just a bit before we get to questions. But it's funny that you bring up.
I'm sorry, Joe. I'm back. I have no idea where I stopped.
It's okay.
I just finished talking and noticed I was off.
It's okay. So I was just gonna say it's funny that you bring up those two things. I'm
back, Joe.
Okay, great, thanks. It's funny you bring up those two things. I'm powering through Henry Kissinger's new book like it's candy on leadership, and the first chapter of Kissinger's book it's called The Strategy of Humility. It's the first chapter is strategy on humility, and you bring up both humility and curiosity. It's very clear throughout your career that you remained a learner and a beginner in everything that you did. And there's a phrase in the SEAL teams that obviously the only easy day was yesterday, and you have to earn your trident every day. So give us your interpretation of that. Earn your trident every day.
Yeah, I was so fortunate to be able to be in the Constitutional Committee to help write those, and we created both the ethos and a code, and you're quoting from the code 5 or 6 short sentences, and one of them was earn your trident every day. And it was a sense about not being complacent, about you're not done. It's never done, right? Not when you graduate SEAL training, not when you are a leader in a certain position. It's never done, and you're earning it every day. And so you better commit to getting better and to contributing in a significant way, because that's what we're about, is getting after it, and it's not done.
Yep. Well, thanks, Rob. And I want to open it up to everybody now. So if anybody has a question, just go off mute and ask Rob directly. If not, I have a host of other questions to get through the last 7 minutes, but I certainly don't want to end early with Rob's time. So who has a question?
I have a question, if that works.
Please.
Cool. Yeah, hi everyone, and hi Rob. Thank you so much for sharing all your experiences. One question on leadership through different times, particularly through peacetime on one hand and wartime on the other hand. So there's this idea that, say, a CEO or a leader should behave differently, or at least the times call for different traits or styles or ways of behaving. Do you agree? What's your perspective on that? Do you agree that, say, wartime calls for very different, traits and behaviors? And if so, what do you think are the best ways to lead through a wartime? Thank you.
Thanks, Emil. Yeah, I don't know if I don't think it's traits, right? But certainly the times are different and organizations demand different things. In peacetime, there's more focus on the administrivia and how things look, and you're burdened down with paperwork. In wartime, when McChrystal was running the Joint Special Operations Command, their theme was action at the speed of war. And so two things happen in wartime. Everything speeds up. I mean, the last 10 years of my life, or 20, I guess, since 9/11 in the military went by so fast. Your life is consumed and things go super fast. And obviously in combat and in conflict, things are sped up as well. So you need to act faster, think faster, have faster processes. But the other thing is that it matters. It matters much more, right? Lives are on the line at an astronomical level in war. And so it puts a premium on better leadership, on aggressive leadership. I think all that stuff applies, all those traits apply in peacetime. It's just that they are tamped down by organizational demands and requirements that are lifted in wartime versus peacetime.
Yeah, that was a great question, Emil. Thank you so much. Emil is one of our founders in the portfolio. And you're calling in from Amsterdam. Is that correct?
Thank you so much, Rob. That was super insightful. No, actually, right now I'm in Poland visiting Camille, my partner in the company, a co-founder.
Wonderful.
He's in the room.
Wonderful. Okay, do we have another question? We never get off these calls early when we have folks like Rob on, so please ask a question if you have it. Rob, I certainly have another question for you. When you see, oh, sorry, go ahead, please.
This is Laura.
Oh, great.
Hi,
Laura.
I would just like to know how you prepare for difficult conversations.
Rob, did you get that question?
No, can you repeat?
Sure. Laura asked, how do you prepare for difficult conversations? Did you get that, Rob?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
You got me, Joe?
Did you get that?
Yeah, I got it. Yeah, I love the question. How do you prepare for difficult questions? And my wife and I talk about this all the time. She runs an ER department, and people are people, and they're very difficult, and you're faced with all kinds of opportunities to lean into the difficult conversations. And one of the things we talk about is not avoiding them. I have this feeling in the pit of my stomach, right, when it's like, oh man, I'm going to have a hard one, and I've learned to lean into that instead of avoid it. And I think that a lot of people avoid it because they want to avoid the discomfort of having that hard to. When you feel that, first inkling of, man, it's time to talk to somebody about something tough, then lean into it and get ready. And I think the key part of that is understanding the emotions wrapped up into it and being prepared to deal with those from all sides, but also understanding the facts. And the key point in a difficult conversation is, hey, what do we want? Where are we going with this? And you can get sidetracked with the emotion or the defensiveness or whatever. But as you're preparing, you got to think about what's the objective? What do we want to achieve, and how do we get there? And then just lean into it.
Yeah, thanks for that response. That is definitely something that founders experience often throughout their entire journey. So that's a great question to leave this off at. So a few things in the last minute. One, I do want to apologize for all the logistical things. Take full ownership. I take full ownership for sucking today, that's for sure. And it's ironic that I sucked on the day where the guy who told me that I sucked is our guest. So I apologize for the sketchy internet and for everything leading up to the call. Apologize for that, and we will continue to get better at launching these. It's something that we obviously are very excited about, to have these conversations with founders, with funders, with investors and favorites. It's important for us to make sure that everyone knows who we know that is impacting our lives and our fund. Rob is someone who has impacted our lives and who we look to for guidance and support when we have difficult leadership conversations, both internal to the fund and outside of the fund. So I want everyone to know that you should reach out to Rob via LinkedIn, connect with him there. If you would like his personal information, please send me an email. I'll be happy to make an introduction. He's always one to have and hold wonderful conversations with interesting and exceptional people, which all of you are. And we'll continue to get better and have wonderful people for all of you to learn from and listen from. And 2 weeks from now, you can expect to have the same thing. And we'll be announcing who that guest is, which I'm very excited about, in our next email update to you all. So thank you very much. And this is a great opportunity for all of us to learn from Rob. So please reach out to him if you have questions. And we appreciate your time and, most importantly, your attention. So thank you for joining today. Thank you, Rob.
Thanks, Joe. I really enjoyed it. Again, I'm sorry for the connectivity problems as well. The place we're staying is just short on bandwidth, I guess. But
yeah,
it always is, and I'm happy to connect. So thanks.
You got it. Thank you, sir. And I will talk to you all shortly. Bye-bye.